David Carradine threw everything he had for 9 seconds, and Bruce Lee never got out of the chair. That is the part the crew could never explain afterward. Not that the small man won, men win fights, that he won without standing up. The television star came at a seated man with the whole repertoire that had made him famous, and at the end of 9 seconds he was the one on the floor, and the man in the folding chair had barely shifted his weight. It was a large soundstage, a period set dressed as an old Chinese street, and it was crowded the way sets get crowded on a slow afternoon. Cameras cold, crew scattered along the edges, a few dozen extras in martial arts uniforms sitting cross-legged where the assistant director had parked them, and 2 men who had never been in the same room before, one of them famous for playing a wandering master on television, the other famous, among the people who actually knew, for being one. Stay with this, because the thing that made the next 9 seconds inevitable was not anger. It was a specific kind of confusion that only happens between a man who performs a thing and a man who does it. The television star was not a fraud, and the story is thinner if you pretend he was. He had trained, he moved well. He had spent years on a hit show, playing a serene martial artist who dispensed wisdom and slow, graceful violence, and he had come to inhabit it, the way actors do, until the line between playing the thing and being the thing had gone comfortably blurry in his own mind. Millions of people saw his face when they pictured Kung Fu. He had signed the autographs, he had heard the applause, and there was one more thing, unspoken, sitting under the whole afternoon like a stone under still water. The role that had made him a household name was one the small man in the chair had once wanted, had once been perhaps the most qualified man alive to play, and had not been given, for reasons everyone in that era understood and nobody said out loud. The television star knew it. The small man knew it. Neither had ever mentioned it, and neither would. But it was there, and some part of the star's need to point across that floor came from standing in a room with the living proof that the part he had been handed belonged, by every honest measure but the one that counted, to the man in the folding chair. And somewhere in all of it he had quietly started to believe that the applause was for the fighting and not for the acting, which are 2 different jobs that only look alike from the audience. The small man in the black jacket had been invited to the set to consult on fight choreography, and he had spent the afternoon doing what he did on sets, which was watch. He sat in a folding chair near the camera, quiet, still, giving small notes when they were asked for and none when they were not. He did not announce himself. He did not need to. Half the stunt crew already treated him like something between a colleague and a legend, and the television star had been listening to that low current of deference all afternoon, and it had worked on him the way it works on a proud man, until he could not let it sit any longer. He crossed the floor, he stopped in front of the seated man, and he pointed at him, arm fully extended, finger leveled at his chest, and he said it loud enough for the whole stage to hear, because the point was that the whole stage should hear. "Everybody keeps whispering about you," he said. "The real thing, the master. So get up. Show me something that isn't in a movie." Somebody laughed. Then a few more. It was a good moment of theatre, the handsome star of the Kung Fu show, calling out the quiet little man in the chair, and the crew, tired and bored and ready for a break, enjoyed it. The small man looked up at the pointing finger and then at the face above it, and he did not get up. "You don't need to stand for a conversation," he said, mildly. "Say what you want to say." That was the first thing that went wrong for the television star, because he had expected the small man to rise, and a challenge loses its shape when the other man simply declines to stand inside it. So he did the thing his whole training had taught him to do when he wanted to command a scene. He performed. He dropped into a stance, the beautiful photogenic stance the camera loved, and he told the seated man to defend himself, and he began. What happened next took 9 seconds. Count them, because the crew did, afterward, over and over, trying to make it come out differently. Second one. The television star threw a high, graceful kick, the signature move, the one that looked magnificent in slow motion on a Friday night. It was aimed to stop a hair from the seated man's face, to prove a point, to freeze there and let everyone see how close he could come. It never froze anywhere. The small man tilted his head perhaps 2 inches, and the foot went through empty air where his face had been, and he had not raised a hand. Second 2, the star recovered, surprised, and came again, a spinning strike, more committed now. Here is the thing about a spin, the thing television never has to teach, because television lets you land it. For the half second you are turning, you are blind, and you have told the whole world where your weight is going before you can see where it landed. The seated man had read it before the turn began. He leaned back a few degrees in the chair. The strike passed close enough to move his hair and hit nothing. Second 3. And now something changed in the small man's stillness, and the people close enough to see it went quiet, because he was not dodging anymore in the ordinary sense. He was arriving early. He was already leaning away from each attack a fraction before it launched, the way you step back from a door you know is about to open, and to the crew it began to look less like a man avoiding blows and more like a man who had been handed the script a page ahead of the person throwing them. Second 4, different from speed. That was what the stunt coordinator kept saying later, trying to explain it, and never quite managing. Not faster, earlier. A fast man reacts late and well. This man did not react at all. Reaction is a thing you do after the attack starts. He was moving before it started, off a read most fighters cannot make, and no actor is ever taught to make. The small tells that live in a shoulder, a hip, an eye, a breath, a fraction of a second before the strike is born. The star was announcing every technique with his whole body a beat before he threw it, the way you do when you have only ever thrown techniques at people paid to receive them, and the seated man was reading the announcements. A strike that lands where a man has already calmly stopped being is not a near miss. It is a question the attacker is failing without being told the question. Second 5. The star was breathing hard now, and here is where the sound of the room changed, because the laughter died. Not gradually, all at once, the way a sound stops when a room understands something before it can put words to it. The grips stopped grinning. A woman with a clipboard lowered it. Somewhere a man who had been filming the moment on a home camera for a laugh quietly kept filming for a different reason. The star was throwing real technique, everything the show had made famous, and every piece of it was finding the exact spot the seated man had just quietly vacated. He had never in his career had to fight a man who would not cooperate with the rhythm. On the show, the other man always fell where the choreography said. This one read the choreography and stepped out of it before it happened. Second 6. Frustration now, which is the enemy of everything. The star loaded up his best strike, the one that ended episodes, and put his whole weight behind it, committed completely, because surely commitment was the thing that had been missing. Commitment was exactly the wrong thing. A committed man cannot change his mind mid-flight, and the seated man had been waiting patiently through 5 seconds for exactly that, for the moment the performer stopped testing and finally fully threw himself. Second 7. The small man moved for the first time. Not much. He did not stand. He shifted his weight in the chair, brought one hand up off his knee, and met the incoming arm, not with force but with a light redirection, a palm laid against the driving wrist that added just a few degrees to a path already overcommitted. He did not stop the strike. Stopping it would have taken strength. He helped it, the way you help a man who is already falling, and sent all that beautiful committed weight a few inches past where it had meant to go. Second 8. And a few inches was everything, because the television star's own momentum, unopposed and slightly redirected, kept going the way momentum does, out past his own base, out past the point where a man can get a foot under himself, and he went off balance in front of 36 people, with his magnificent technique carrying him forward into nothing. Second 9. He went down, not thrown, not struck, not hurt, dropped by his own committed weight, arriving somewhere his balance could not follow, guided there by a seated man who had lifted one hand off his knee and put it back. And then it was very quiet on that stage, and the television star was on the floor, and the small man was still in the chair, and nobody was laughing. The star pushed himself up on his hands and stayed there a moment, on one knee, and the thing on his face was not pain, and it was not even embarrassment. Exactly. It was the particular vertigo of a man discovering that the thing he had believed about himself and the thing that was true had a gap in them, and that the gap had just opened in public, on his own set, in 9 seconds, in front of everyone he worked with. Stay with this, because what the small man did next is the reason this is not a story about humiliation. He got up from the chair, finally, now that it was over, and he crossed to the kneeling man, and he put out a hand to help him to his feet. And when the star was standing, the small man kept hold of the hand a moment, and he said something quiet, meant only for the two of them, that one sound man swore he caught on a live boom, and repeated for years. He said, "You move beautifully. That is real, and it is not nothing. But you have spent years learning how a fight looks. I have spent mine learning how it feels. They are different studies. You could learn the second one. You have the body for it. You have only been taught the wrong half." It was not an insult, and it was not entirely a kindness. It was just true, and the truth of it was what landed, because the television star had come across that floor to expose a legend, and had instead been handed, in front of his whole crew, an accurate map of the exact place his craft ended. There is no answer to that. A lesser man would have found one anyway, some excuse, some rematch. This one had it in him, barely, to do the harder thing. He looked at the small man for a long moment, and then the fight went out of his face, and he nodded, and he said, "Lo, show me some time." And he meant it. "I ran sound on that stage," the boom operator would say, years later whenever the story came up. I have watched 100 tough guys decide to test somebody on a set. It always ends the same ugly way. Somebody hurt, somebody fired. This is the only time I ever saw a man get taken apart completely and walk away better for it. He came out of his chair one time, for 1 second, and that was the whole fight. The rest was just a famous man learning something in front of everybody. Here is the part that stayed with the people who were there, and it is the quiet center of the whole story. Nothing about that afternoon changed the small man. He sat back down in the folding chair when it was over, and went back to watching the choreography, gave his next note when it was asked for, as if nothing had happened at all, because to him nothing much had. He had learned nothing, he had proven nothing to himself. He had only briefly declined to let another man be wrong about him out loud, and then let the matter drop the second it was settled. 9 seconds that the other man would carry for the rest of his life had cost the small man almost no thought at all. But it changed the television star completely. The people who knew him said he was different after that day, quieter about certain things, more honest about the difference between what he did for a camera and what a very small number of people in the world could actually do. He never told the story as a defeat. He told it when he told it at all, as the afternoon he found out there was a whole other half of his own art he had never been taught to him in 9 seconds by a man who beat him without standing up, and who then reached down and offered to teach him the rest. Years later, people who had been on that stage would argue about the details, the way people always do, how many strikes there really were, whether the small man moved once or twice, exactly what was said at the end. But the ones who had been close enough to see it clearly always came back to the same simple, strange fact, the one that had stopped the laughter cold. A man had thrown everything he knew, for 9 full seconds, at someone sitting in a chair, and the someone in the chair had won without getting up.